Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call to order our fifth or sixth or seventh hearing in this matter. This is the application of H&W Apartments, seeking a 40B project on Randolph Avenue. My name is John Leonard, Chairman of the Board of Appeals. To my immediate right is Board Member Virginia Donahue King, and to my immediate left is Board Member Jeffrey Mullen. The rules of the board are going to be the same as they've been at the other hearings. First of all, we'll hear from certain witnesses. We'll have examination or questions from the board and perhaps from other counsel. We're going to be sitting from 5 o'clock this evening to 7 o'clock, pursuant to previous agreement. We're tape recording these hearings, as you all know, so that we'd ask that before anyone speaks, speak up nice and clear and loud. Tell us your name and address. So we'll have an accurate record of the proceeding, which is our tape recording system and not the television system. So I think without further ado, one of the issues that's going to come up is one of scheduling of certain hearing dates here. So we've conferred with the board members, and we know we're going to have at least one and maybe two, and possibly even three additional hearings on this matter. And since pursuant to the present schedule, the application has to be decided on or before June 19th, time is very, very short. And we've been particularly willing to try to accommodate witness and expert schedules and the like. But as we start to get towards crunch time, we're going to have to be a little more definitive and a little more firm in our rescheduling. So the next hearing we're proposing is for May 28th, which is a Thursday, and we're proposing that hearing to be at 7:30 or 7 o'clock in the Council of Aging facility. Is that generally agreeable to everyone except for hospital visits and anniversaries? Well, let's do, I'd rather start at 7 o'clock if that's all right with everyone. 7 o'clock. Ms. O'Donnell, how's that with you? Mr. Caggiano, are you here?
Yes, that's fine. Obviously, a lot of materials to respond to, so I'm not sure we're going to do that response to everything by then, but that's what we can.
Okay, the second continuation date, which would be a follow-up date, which I think we'll need, because we have to not only finish the evidence with the various parties here, we have to have a session to allow the public to be heard on this application. Several members of the public have already, but we want to open the doors after all of the technical evidence is in to allow the public to express their views on this application. And we're suggesting the second date would be June 9th, Tuesday, June 9th, with the possibility of a third meeting after that, probably shortly thereafter. But how is June 9th with everyone's schedule? Is that generally agreeable?
We're in front of the Conservation Commission on June 9th.
Okay. And we'll have to talk about that after the meeting. Let's not waste a lot of time. But we'll be looking for a date either shortly before or shortly after June 9th for our second continuance. So the purpose of this hearing is twofold. Number one, we received a communication from Mr. Joseph Mullins, who indicated that he or his attorney, Mr. Buckley, or other experts may want to appear before the board and make a presentation. So first of all, we'll hear from Mr. Mullins or Mr. Buckley and their experts, and then we'll hear from Attorney Schreiber and her experts, with the hope of at least finishing that aspect of the case tonight. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that if there are a lot of questions of the experts, but we'll just proceed in an orderly fashion and see where we go. If we don't finish Ms. Schreiber's presentation, then that will go over to May 28th, and we'll finish it at that time. Okay? So without further ado, Attorney Buckley, welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Members of the board, for the record, Robert Buckley, Raymond Bronstein, 3 Center Plaza, Boston, and I represent Joseph Mullins at 300 Highland Street, who is sitting to my immediate left, and we have a site civil engineer, Tom Houston, who we have retained.
Good. Welcome to the board,
Evening.
Mr. Houston. I
Thank
think
you,
this
Mr.
is your
Chairman.
first time here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we provided a letter to the board, and our purpose here is twofold this evening. First, to address your comments just a moment ago, while we do understand the importance of acting in a timely manner on a comprehensive permit application, I would just impress upon the board, I don't think you have to feel obligated if there's outstanding information to close this on June 19th. That's your discretion, but I do think in some of the hearings that I've gone to and some of the material that I've reviewed, there seems to be quite a bit of information that has yet been finalized or responded to allow the board to make an informed decision. I would also like the record to show that Mr. Mullen is not against affordable housing.
Mullins.
Mullins.
I'm sorry. What I am here is to, duly noted.
It is Milton. There's a lot of Mullins.
And we have a Mr. Mullen here, who sometimes is quite excitable.
Right,
so,
okay. Duly noted.
And spontaneous.
Okay, and I will recall that as I go forward. But
Delight. And going.
our client has a long and successful history in doing affordable housing. I think our client, which I think is a neutral way of saying it, so I'll stick to that, is just against a plan that is poorly conceived and, in our mind, will lead to considerable angst in the future. And we have an opportunity to do it right if at all possible. And my view is that we should take that opportunity to vet the issues, to condition those things that can be conditioned, and to ask the difficult questions at this juncture, rather than have something that is put in place that we all look back and say, what did we do and why did we do it? And the reason for that is twofold. One is safety and factors of people living there. But the second is, if you are an advocate for affordable housing, people will look to projects that are poorly conceived and executed as a rationale for altering the creation of affordable housing. So it does run into the face of the public policy that the Commonwealth has chosen to put forward, and is a positive policy for the future of the Commonwealth. That being said, I do have a copy of a letter that I believe was delivered to the board. It was provided to me today, criticizing or challenging my assertion that there is outstanding information remaining. It's not unexpected, and I think that it would have been attacked. I perhaps would have taken if I was on the other side. That being said, I do think if I could just articulate some of the issues that I think are out there and there are ongoing hearings. I sat through the other evening the Milton Conservation Commission. There seems to be quite a bit of information that has to be resolved in terms of what are the resource areas and how are they being impacted by the present development scheme. These tie into such things as the hydrology that will be altered as a result of the construction of the crossing. The crossing itself, what are the impacts of that crossing, and how can they be conditioned, if at all possible, by the commission in its present form? And the resolution of those issues will have a profound bearing on the ultimate design of this project. And I think that is a factor that this board has to consider in its review. Closely aligned to that are issues with respect to drainage. I've sat through 2 meetings now and watched some of the tapes of the prior meetings, and I've spoken to some of our consultants and read some of the materials provided by others. I'm not sure that the drainage on the site is fully understood or accounted for. And again, compliance with the state regulations or policies with respect to stormwater drainage and how it is handled will have an impact on the ultimate design of this project. And I think it behooves everyone to sit and take that information, digest it, and come, if at all possible, with a reasoned decision. The issue that I struggle with constantly, and I'm trying to figure out, is the public safety issue. I think you're looking at a crossing in a layout of a roadway or a driveway, if you want to call it such, that in my mind, and I differ even from in some of the people on my own team, that I'm not as concerned about how the emergency vehicles, once they get into the site, move around and turn and inconvenience those on the site. I'm more concerned that if there's an issue that arises in that driveway that blocks that driveway, no one's going to be able to get in at all. And that creates, in my mind, a very dangerous situation. And again, since we have an opportunity to address it now, well, let's take that opportunity, if at all possible. And to me, it will be a major engineering feat, if it's possible, to address that. It intersects with a very busy road that is state jurisdictional, and has the state weighed in as to what they are going to do with respect to conditions at the site exit or entrance. There was a comment at one of the hearings that the state indicated that they were not concerned at all with respect to the layout of the access way, and I wouldn't expect them to be. The internal access way is a private way, but I do think the state will weigh in significantly on the intersection with Route 38. And I think that, again, has impacts or affects the ultimate design and functionality of this project. And I go back to, with only one egress, that road, in my opinion, and I'm not an engineer, but should provide at least sufficient width and opportunity so that if it is blocked, there are alternatives. And, in my mind, when I've done these projects in the past, a boulevard approach is perhaps a way of addressing that, but I think those alternatives have to be analyzed and considered, and there should be a determination whether or not, if at all, that can be implemented given the site restrictions. Sometimes it's a bad site. Despite all the engineering you pour into it, it's a bad site. And again, I go back to what I said in my introduction, that we have an opportunity to look at those conditions now, and to the extent we can, make the best possible decision, if a decision is possible. So I'm not saying that it's an automatic extension beyond the 19th, but I'm just impressing upon the board that if at all possible, if there's outstanding information, I don't think we should be wed to that date if there are outstanding issues. And the applicant, if they are troubled by that, could always take an appeal directly up to the HAC in terms of a delay. And in my view, they wouldn't do that because they know these are outstanding issues that will have to be resolved here or at the Housing Appeals Committee. So again, let's do it right.
Let me ask you a question on that. Mr. Buckley, wouldn't the applicant be pressing that the application has been constructively approved by the failure of the board not to act by the 19th?
And I assume that one would that would be their argument, but I think the argument opposed to that is that there's additional information that was requested in a timely manner to be reviewed and replied or studied. So
my concern is, well, what if the board lost that argument? Then haven't we wasted our time here for these 6 or 7 hearings?
in all due respect, my argument to that is you may have a bad project. You know, if you feel compelled to approve it by the 19th without consideration of these issues.
No,
I
I'm
think
saying
that's-
if the Housing Appeals Committee rules that the reasons for which we've continued the hearing are inadequate or insufficient, doesn't that mean that we've constructively approved the application as proposed, and basically we would lose our rights? We'd even lose, wouldn't we lose our rights to have town council argue the merits before the Housing
You have
Appeals
your
Committee?
consultant, but no, I don't think.
Not in
you'd
your
lose them.
opinion?
Right, no.
Okay.
But again, I don't think that's going to be, that shouldn't be the motivation in terms of what are we doing here? We're looking at a project that people are going to be living in and living in for a long period of time. Again, let's look at these issues, which are serious issues, and try to do it correctly.
Okay.
And that's, you know, if you're in the right, I don't think you have to be afraid of that challenge. I think that,
I'm afraid of it if we're wrong, or if the Housing Appeals Committee deems us to
well,
be
you know,
wrong.
you know what your worst-case scenario is, you've seen the project. Do you think you can condition it to address these issues?
Well, I don't think that's a question which I should be answering at the present
That's
time,
right.
because
That's right,
I haven't heard from all of the parties.
that's right,
And we
because
haven't had
you
the
have to get the complete
the
information.
consideration of the other
Right.
board members.
That's right.
With respect to the issue of the June 19th date, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No,
Okay, because I think this may be an appropriate spot to flesh that issue out a little bit, rather than have you making your presentation. Ms. O'Donnell, do you want to be heard on this issue of the 19th, and whether there's sufficient reason for the board to delay the hearing beyond that? And I can also tell you that Mr. Caggiano, if you want to be heard on this issue at the present time rather than some other time, I'm delighted to have you. If you want to come up and take your seat, that's fine. Ms. O'Donnell?
The board, it's not an unusual request from a board to an applicant to say that there is additional time that's needed to address concerns that have been raised by abutters, that have been raised by the Conservation Commission, that may be raised by the town itself. I know that typically applicants usually are amenable to an extension of time because it's better for their project to actually get a permit than to spend time setting up at the Housing Appeals Committee and then getting sent back down to the board. And so it's sort of one of those situations where you sort of feel like if you're within, 3 weeks of whatever of getting a decision and closing the hearing and getting the decision, then you would expect the applicant to sort of say, yes, that would be a reasonable period of time. I can understand that an applicant doesn't want to have an extension out to 6 or 7 months. But if we had a situation where we were closing on the 19th and there were specific issues that needed to be addressed in order for the board to consider additional testimony, it would seem to me that it would be in the applicant's best interest to agree to a short extension period of time.
Okay. In the interim, as a matter of fact, today, we received a letter from Mr. Caggiano, which is somewhat lengthy, 4 pages, but I read the tenor of this letter as indicating that the applicant would not be in favor of a continuance beyond the 19th. Do you want to address these
Sure.
issues, sir?
The letter's not intended to foreclose the possibility if the circumstances, as Kathleen has suggested, are there. We're close to a decision, there's some sort of agreement, that sort of thing. But I was responding to Attorney Buckley's letter. And based on the information in that letter, we don't see any open issues that are not currently well underway that should cause the June 19th date to be extended.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll keep that under advisement and,
yeah, I do have another aspect in the presentation. It's not it's not before the board, we're not substituting this as a plan, but our client has taken the time and expense to show that
We should put that up.
many of the issues, and has had a full engineering plan done, that we, and I believe, based upon what I've heard from some of the boards, are concerned with, can be addressed, can properly be addressed, and still yield an economic return. That's not before the board. I don't expect the board to weigh in on that. What I'm using this as an opportunity to say that if the applicant were willing to meet with some of the butters or people of interest that have some concerns, there may be a way to tweak and address some of those issues. With one exception, and I'm going to have to be proven wrong on this, I don't see, from a public safety standpoint, in its present design, how that site access drive can survive over a long period of time without creating a very dangerous situation. I'm not saying that and I'm not an engineer, so I don't know what the solution is, but good engineers, I think, will oftentimes come up with a solution. And maybe, Joe, if you want to, this shows.
Mr. Chairman, may I interject for just a moment?
of course you can.
First, I'd just like to indicate that the applicant here is always willing to meet with the abutters to talk about their concerns and try to address them. Excuse me. Second, we have 2 hours for tonight's hearing. We don't, there's clear case law. This is a completely different project and development than the applicant's proposing. We are here to talk about the applicant's project, not, a butter's, perceived other possible developments for the project. I just don't think we have enough time to, especially in today's hearing, to go through their proposed project, essentially. And there's clear case law on point regarding, other alternative proposed projects, in the fact that the board is to consider the applicant's project and not alternative projects by either the town or abutters.
Well, I think what Mr. Buckley is saying, he's trying to stimulate your imagination to some extent to see if it may be a fertile source of further discussion. Let me ask you, Mr. Buckley, how long will this presentation?
It'll take no more than 10 minutes. But, Mr. Chairman, if I may, oftentimes when a 40B is done, when there's a debate as to the appropriate number of units and how do you address that units, there is that dialogue. There is that, can the project be done in an economical manner? And usually it's a reduction in units. The board has the right, if they feel that the project is too large, to request a reduction and to validate that reduction based upon the economics, to ask for information to support their position that the unit count should be less. I'm not proposing that. What I'm proposing here, and I think the chairman correctly stated, is to stimulate the imagination that there may be a way, and I caveat that, with one exception that I still haven't been shown that it can be done, and that's a site access drive, that many of the issues in terms of setbacks, or wetlands, no disturb zones, can be addressed, and can be addressed in a way that addresses not only your desire, your client's desire to achieve an a reasonable economic return, and yet preserve the local regulations. So, I don't know, Joe, if you want to.
Yeah,
Well, let me just say this. I'm inclined to allow that presentation. Are there any
this
objections
won't take long.
by my fellow board members?
Short presentation will go.
Why don't you proceed, Mr. Mullen? We'll do
This won't
for
take long.
10 minutes.
This alternate plan that I've shown, I hope you can see it, Mr. Chairman, and I tried to position it so others could see it as well. It's not something I presented for your consideration because I can't do that. I don't control or own the land, they do. And the purpose for putting it together, and I had a contractor, an architect, and an engineer put it together simply to demonstrate that you could build fewer than 90 units on site and have it be economically feasible. Now, I've had a feasibility study performed as well. I don't want to present it here tonight. I could at a later date. But I'm thinking downstream because I'm presuming that Mr. Caggiano and perhaps Mr. Holland will be appealing this to the Housing Appeals Committee, presumably saying that they needed 90 units in order for it economically feasible. My plan would indicate that it's economically feasible with as few as 30 or 35 units. So that's the purpose of my preparing the meeting, the plan. You can't consider this, and I'm not asking you to do that. I would like to just make a few comments, if I could.
Please.
I attended a meeting with Tom Houston, my engineer did, last Friday in Town Hall with Mr. Caggiano and Mr. Burke and the engineer for niche engineering, Mr. Chuck Turner. It was informative, and I got quite a bit out of it. I found out that, for instance, there had not been any hydrological study done on the land. And I sent a letter to you, Mr. Leonard, and you responded to me and said that perhaps it was the Concom that had to engage such a study. I think it's important because Mr. Mr. Turner said that once you put a road across the wetland, it restricts the flow of water, and it could cause ponding in the backyards of those houses on Randolph Avenue. That's my concern, and that was his concern. I think it's essential to measure that. If it's a problem, we should know that. Hasn't been done. I'm hoping that it will be done. At the meeting also, Mr. Turner thought it was important, at least he said it's possible there could be ponding. So, but it was also expressed that the fire chief was not concerned in having access to all sides of the building. I guess maybe I've got more of a problem than others do, but perhaps there should be an opinion by the fire chief in writing, because you can't get around all four sides of the building. And regardless if it's sprinklered, I think they should have access to it to fight fires.
Well, he so testified, not in writing, but personally before the board.
He said,
He said that he did not think, while it may be preferable to have access to all four sides, he thought that it was sufficiently safe, or words to that effect, if he had access to three sides of the large building.
well, I asked the question, and he said because it's sprinklered, and look, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a fireman. I mean, it seems to me if you're going to fight fires, you ought to be fighting it from all sides. My overall concerns of mine is the public safety. The police chief asserts that there were 4 and now there are 5 fatalities on Route 28. The fire chief says he can back down onto Route 28, and maybe he can, but I don't think that's preferable. The school buses must negotiate a very difficult exit, trash trucks as well. The fire chief says he cannot get to all sides of the building. I said that. The DPW fellow, Mr. Lynch, says that the road is too narrow. Mr. Chairman, I used your words against you last time. I said that you said that all people are entitled to peaceful, quiet enjoyment of their property. And how about those 8 houses on Randolph Avenue? Those little Cape Cod houses. They have 25,000 cars a day in their front yard. Their backyard currently is forested, has a brook, turkey, deer, and it's pretty quiet, but not for long, because now they're going to have a 300-foot long building behind them with 156 cars, street lights, and winking and blinking at night. I don't think that's peaceful, quiet enjoyment. So I had been thinking, frankly, I've been back and forth a couple of times because said before, I've had some involvement in 40B in the past. I've been thinking that you probably should condition your approval, since there'll probably be an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee. But you cannot improve this proposal, I'm convinced, with conditions. There are too many units, it's too small and wet a site, and there are 14-foot retaining walls. So I would urge you, Mr. Chairman, and other board members, that you deny the comprehensive permit. And we'll go to the Housing Appeal Committee and we will challenge it. And if we lose there, then we go to Superior Court. So I think we're just getting started. That's my opinion. I'm finished.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman, just in conclusion, I just want the record to be clear. We're not asking that this hearing be kept open indefinitely. I think that all we're asking is that there be no urgency to close this hearing if there are outstanding issues, because in my experience, the issues that I raised and have been raised by other technical experts are critical issues that go to the design and implementation of the project. What are your site constraints? What are your restrictions? Where are the wetlands? How are you handling drainage? What is the traffic circulation? When you have well-thought-out answers or data that support your answers on that, that leads to the ultimate design of the project. And the material that I've reviewed and discussed with our technical experts haven't given me the level of confidence that status has been reached yet. Could it be reached shortly? Perhaps. It's a question of providing that information. I reiterate what my client said. I'm troubled by the site access in terms of the safety situation. And is there a resolution to that? I'd have to be shown that. So with that, any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Let me see if the board members have any questions. Mr. Mullen?
No,
Mrs. King? Okay. Ms. O'Donnell, do you have any questions?
No, I do not.
Mr. Caggiano, do you have any questions at this time? No. Okay, well, then thank you very much.
Time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Oh, can I ask one question of Mr. Caggiano? Did the meeting with Mass Highway take place? And do you know what the result of that meeting was?
May I defer to
Of
Jim
course you
Burke?
can. Of course you can. Mr. Burke, welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you just tell us your name for the
Sure.
record?
My name is James Burke with DeSalle Burke and Associates, a professional engineer with offices in Quincy, Massachusetts. We did meet with Mass DOT, met with several department heads and discussed the project probably for about half an hour. They didn't really have any concerns with regards to the width or the sidewalk. They obviously were interested in getting the application for the access permit. But there really wasn't a lot of feedback per se, because they had the plans for a while, and I gave them a copy of everything that we've submitted on thumb drive, as well as hard copies for their review. They did ask for a detail of the entrance, a little bit a blow-up, if you will, to make sure that the sidewalk would be handicap accessible, and made sure that the radiuses were to their liking. We have not presented that to them yet, but it was a good meeting and informative, and didn't really change the design. Most of the design changes are coming from this board and the other peer reviews going on.
What's the next step in the process?
I'd say once we get the plans, I think after this iteration of revisions, we'll prepare a curb cut access permit plan and submit it
And for their approval?
for their approval.
And is that done on an administrative basis, or is there another meeting or another hearing on that process?
It's pretty much administrative. They'll submit first, and then they'll review it for 30 days to make sure all the information is provided. And then after that 30 days, and then they review it technically and submit the permit, and they'll ask for revisions at that time.
They don't publish notice of a public hearing, or they don't seek public comments on the proposed
No.
access road?
No.
Were they concerned, or did they discuss at all the issue of whether the ingress and egress from the proposed access road onto Route 28 at
They
high traffic times was of concern, or was that something that's not
It
within their
wasn't,
jurisdiction?
yeah, wasn't really, wasn't discussed. We talked about the counts and access into 28, and but as far as movements in and out of the property, wasn't discussed.
Do you know whether public safety is one of the factors that MassDOT is supposed to be considering when granting a curb cut permit?
I would say that's accurate.
Okay. Is there a public comment period, or do you know whether the public can participate in this process or submit
Not to
letters
my
or
knowledge.
otherwise?
Yeah, not to my knowledge. It's a simple access permit request for a driveway, for a multi-residential property.
Was there any discussion about MassDOT, in some way limiting or restricting access to and from the property for, during high
Wasn't,
traffic count times?
It wasn't discussed, but the gentleman, Raj, I believe his name was, we told him that we have, the counts available, and we submitted the information to him, and, once we officially, I assume that once we officially submit for permit, that they'll start the review process on that, and perhaps they'll look at the movements in and out and direct us how they would like to proceed.
Okay, do you know the particular name of the division of MassDOT that you're dealing with here?
That's Division 6 at permits,
And where are they located?
185 Nealon Street in Boston.
And what's the name of the public official that you're dealing with principally on this project?
His name is Vivek Trivedi.
Do you mind?
Vivek
Yep.
Trivedi.
Okay.
Good man.
Good, well, thank you very much. I mean, did board members have any questions of Mr. Burke? Mr. Mullen? No. Ms. Soto? Ah, okay. Thank you, Jim. We appreciate your update.
I wonder, John, the DOT access process is not that mysterious. There's a state reg on this, and, perhaps, perhaps that, we could take notice of that. I mean, there's a state highway access permitting reg, I think it's 703 CMR, something or other, forgetting off the top of my head.
Okay, great, we can take a look at that. I think, Ms. Schreiber, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Johanna Schneider. I'm with the law firm of Rackham, Sawyer and Brewster with an office at 160 Federal Street in Boston. I'm here appearing on behalf of the owners of 294 Highland Avenue and 11 Reed Street, who directly abut the project site. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to express our concerns about the development and to present the testimony of two experts who have undertaken a third-party peer review of the project. Their findings are documented in reports that were submitted to the board on May 14th. They're here tonight to amplify some of the findings in their reports and to answer any questions that the board may have about their reports. First up, we're going to have Kim Hazarvardian of TEP LLC, who looked at traffic and parking for the project. Kim will be followed by Janet Bernardo of the Horsley-Witten Group, who looked at environmental, wetlands, and site design issues. After they've given their testimony, assuming we've got time left over, I'd like to come back and say just a few things to sum up our position.
Okay, just in addition to perhaps supplementing or updating their reports that were filed, we just request that you at least give the public here the substance of your findings and the scope of your investigation, just the basics of it, because a lot of people here don't have the opportunity to come to the clerk's office and actually read your report and letters. And likewise, the public out there in TV land may want to have a better idea as to what you've done and why you're concluding. I just have one question of Ms. Schneider, and that is, who owns 294 Howland Street, so we'll have a name for the record?
294 Highland Street is owned by the Lombardi family, Lombardi.
And how about 11 Reed Street?
11 Reed Street is the Carlin family.
Okay, great, thank you very much. So why don't you proceed?
Okay, so we, essentially what I've asked each of our experts to do is to, in the interest of time, hit sort of the bigger points in their reports, and the board can refer, to the smaller points and the full picture in the reports that we've provided. Are you prepared to?
I am prepared.
Start? Okay.
I'm flipping through, we're just checking things over,
Okay.
but I'm prepared.
Why don't you tell us your name and with whom you're associated and what your area of expertise is, and with all of that as a preamble, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you very much. My name is Kim Hazarvardian. I'm a traffic engineer with TEP LLC. Just to give you some background on myself, I have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in civil engineering, specializing in traffic. And I've been working in civil and traffic engineering for going on 34 years.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you
That's
very
great.
much. It's gone by fast. And I've worked on a number of projects and reviews of projects in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, a little bit in Maine and Vermont as well.
Have you worked on any 40B projects?
Yes, I have.
Okay, great. Have you worked on any projects that have access onto major thoroughfares with traffic counts like Route 28 in Randolph, in Milton, Massachusetts?
Yes, I have.
Okay, great. Do you want to tell us about some of those? Or?
Well, let's
very,
see.
very briefly.
Sure, I didn't. I'm going to have to think about that a little bit because I didn't come prepared to do that, but I think
Okay.
I can.
Well, let me do this. Let me ask you, are there any special concerns as a traffic engineer that you take into consideration when you're planning a project that's going to access onto a routeway like Route 28 that has perhaps high traffic counts during the early morning and the late evening?
Sure. A couple of things I look at. First of all, I look at the access point not by itself. I look at it in conjunction with the rest of what's going on the highway and the rest of what's going on the site. And I look at multiple overall concerns. One is the general concern of traffic safety for all movements in and out of the site, and once they get on the site. The second element is traffic operations. How well is the traffic going to flow, both off-site at the access point, so to speak, and on the site. And the third thing I look at is emergency vehicle access. Is the access point going to serve emergency access adequately or well, preferably? In addition to that, if there are school children involved or school buses involved, I'd look at how they're handled. Is the bus stop location been thought out? Are the students going to be sufficiently far away from the road to mitigate risk of run off the road type situations, or the behavior of children spontaneously being too close to the road and edging into it. The concerns have multiple factors that trigger the degree of intensity of our review. One element would be the speed on the road. If it's a 30-mile-an-hour type road, that would be a low-speed road, and we'd look at things in terms of slow speeds and not being as concerned about vehicles slowing or stopping in the road. Volumes. And by the way, the speeds on Randolph Avenue in the applicant's traffic study were 45 to 46 miles an hour, 85th percentile speed. So that would not be a low-speed road.
How would you characterize that?
I would call that
high speed, medium speed, or?
I would call that entering into the realm of high speed. It's not like a 50-mile-an-hour speed that would definitely be high speed, but it's a type of road that would not be a suburban pedestrian-friendly type speed. It's a motor vehicle type speed. It's a hallmark of a street that's intended to provide mobility, high speeds, high volumes, vehicles, not a traffic-calmed road that's designed to consider the pedestrians as more co-equal. Then volumes. Sometimes we deal with volumes in the tens or hundreds on that road, whatever road the site's running on. Other times we'll end up in the tens of thousands over the course of the day and in the thousands during the peak hour. Now, Randolph Avenue, I believe, is roughly 24 to 25,000 a day. I think that's in the applicant's traffic study. And looking at the figures in the applicant's traffic study, the peak hour volumes are at least 2,000 vehicles. So that's definitely a high-volume road. So high speeds, or bordering on high speeds, getting into high speeds, and definitely high volume. Then the third thing I look at is the volume coming into and out of the site. If I'm looking at a single-family residential driveway during the peak hour, that might be one trip. This particular driveway, the numbers are in the 20s and 30s just exiting the site during the AM and PM peak hours. So those volumes will be coinciding with over 2,000 on Randolph Avenue during the peak hours. In addition, I'd look at site distances normally, and general geometry, driveway grades, and so on. Then once I did that, once I had all that information, I'd say, what are we thinking about in terms of geometry? Do we want multiple lanes on the driveway exit? Do we want to have turn lanes on the main road, Randolph Avenue? With respect to the driveway exit, I would look at how traffic would be expected to operate on the driveway. Are the volumes on the main road sufficient to cause delay to traffic wanting to exit the site, particularly left turns wanting to exit the site? more often than not, even on a fairly busy road, right turns out are not too bad. The left turns out tend to be subject to much more delay, because if a vehicle wants to turn left, it has to look at both directions of traffic on Randolph Avenue. So the volumes are much more, and the driver has more to look at once. So there's more delay involved. In a case like this, quite often there's value having a little bit of a right turn lane, so the right turns don't have to wait behind vehicles who may be delayed waiting to turn out to the left. Then I look at the off-site street, in this case Randolph Avenue. Do we want to have a left turn lane or a right turn lane? Now this is an unsignalized situation, and there are references that provide guidance on whether to provide a left turn lane or a right turn lane. But first, before I get into those a little bit, let me explain the why. One of the better ways of reducing collision potential at an intersection is to get turning traffic in a separate lane from the through traffic. The turning traffic is going to be, at minimum, slowing to turn, and if someone's making a left turn from Randolph Avenue northbound into the site, particularly in the face of peak hour traffic, that car could stop. It could need to stop and wait before it turns left. And when that happens, the vehicles in the left-hand lane of Randolph Avenue has 2 lanes northbound, 2 lanes southbound, would need to slow or stop behind that vehicle. The left-hand lane is a high-speed lane, so what happens is you have an increase in rear-end collision potential, and the data bears that out, research bears that out, and you also have an operational disruption where vehicles wanting to proceed straight ahead have to wait behind that left-turning vehicle, and sometimes will end up switching lanes if they can to get around the vehicle. There's one reference that I rely on as a guide, and other traffic professionals do as well, and that's the National Cooperative Highway Research Project Report 457. And that book deals with how to deal with intersection geometry, how to engineer intersections, when to put lanes in. And the book has guidance on when you'd put a left turn lane or a right turn lane on an arterial street at an intersection. And I looked at that in this case, and the guidelines appear to be met. So that's what I'd look at specifically in terms of the access point. And then the process that I'd want a town to consider would be a proactive involvement with Mass DOT and bring up the concerns, have a dialogue. My experience with Mass DOT is they welcome the town's input. They want to hear it. That's my experience. And a proactive asking of the questions and having a dialogue and discussion of things that maybe haven't come up yet in the discussions with MassDOT. So that's my take on access.
All righty, so did you consider the many factors which you just-
Theoretically, he's all theoretical.
Well, that's right, but we haven't gotten to the nub of his report. So this is the factors that you considered in studying the access and ingress to and from the site. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
Okay, and did you visit the site?
I did.
How many times did you visit the site?
I've done drive-bys probably 4 times.
Okay, and
Okay.
did you stop and actually go onto the site
No.
yourself?
No, I did
Okay.
not.
Did you do any other type of research to formulate opinions on safe and easy access to and from this property?
I
Did you look at any reports, or did you? Did you look at the applicant's
Oh.
traffic report here?
I looked at the applicant's traffic study that was revised, I think, October of last year, and then this spring's revision. And I looked at the review comment letters from Vanasson Associates, a town's review consultant, and I looked at the applicant's response. I looked at the town Department of Public Works comment letter as well.
Okay. As a result of your study and your review of these documents, did you formulate any conclusions regarding the propriety of the access road, or what improvements to ingress and egress would constitute prudent engineering practice in trying to determine what's a safe means of accessing and egressing from this site?
I have some thoughts on what I believe should be done from this point on.
Okay.
Many of them don't come into the category of final answers, more working on things. I think that the applicant,
So let me ask you this. What conclusions, as a result of doing your study, what conclusions, if any, did you reach? And tell us what are the reasons for those conclusions?
okay, well, this would just go to the access point.
Okay, so that's the first subject matter you want
Right.
to discuss, the access point, great.
My conclusion is that the idea of turn lanes, additional lanes, should be broached with Mass DOT. Emergency vehicle access, and this actually is something I should talk about a little more, needs to be looked at much more. And here's where the distinction between off-site and on-site begins to blur. Might I go into a little detail on that at this point?
Absolutely.
May I interject with just a
Of course.
question? Excuse me, the turn lanes on Randolph Avenue that you're referring to turn on and off the site, is that something that Mass DOT would typically look at anyway?
It's something that Mass DOT may or may not look at. I'm suggesting that Mass DOT at least be engaged in a discussion or dialogue on it.
So that's not something that Mass DOT ordinarily would look at, the safety of turning on and off the site and whether or not turn lanes specifically should be added?
Oh, I've been involved with many projects where I've had to do turn lanes as an applicant's engineer.
Sure. So I guess what I'm asking is, Mass DOT must have some sort of checklist of things they look at. Is this one of the things that Mass DOT typically looks at?
They quite typically look at it. I've not seen a specific item, turn lanes on a checklist. They look at the intersection, in my opinion, in terms of general traffic operations and safety. And turn lanes is one of the tools you can use toward that end.
Okay, thank you.
You
Can I
see
ask
from, yes, Mr. Muller, go ahead. I was just going to say, it seems to me from what we've heard, the MassDOT's review of a proposed access or curb cut permit seems rather perfunctory unless parties are raising issues that forces them to deal with particular issues. Is that your experience? or-
I would not say that. I would
Okay.
say they look at things generally very thoroughly, and they don't just look at traffic. They look at the actual construction of the curb cut, and they're concerned about drainage and so on. But any engineer should be, and I think they are open to other ideas and other input. It may not be something they thought of, might not be first on their list, but the question should at least be asked, in my opinion.
Is public safety a high concern of MassDOT when looking at an access permit, from your experience?
Yes.
It is.
No question.
Mr. Charby,
The only thing I would add, I think, Kim, what you were suggesting is if the board has residual concerns about traffic flow and access in and out of the site, that the board could seek with the applicant to engage Mass DOT and raise the question, because I think, as Kim said, you know, the access point does seem to qualify under the guidance manual to potentially need these types of turns, and if this was something that the board presented to MassDOT as something that it was concerned about and asked MassDOT to take a look at it in concert with the town, it's something that MassDOT would be willing to do.
Okay, great. Mr. Mullin? you
That
had
was
a
my question. So when you, Krim, just, when we talked about the 457 standard, and you said that you looked at the guidelines, this is an ASHTO publication.
It's a Transportation Research Board.
TRB is associated with, I mean, this is the standard that MassDOT would rely on in a overall.
It's
Can you speak to that?
It's one of the it's one of the guidelines that they have available to rely on. They have their own project development and design guide that has a lot of things in it, but not everything. And this would be something that would be a supplement. I call it a supplement to that. It's more information.
So what did you mean when you said in your overall description that it appears to meet the criteria for the turning lanes? Can you just expand upon that?
In a nutshell, the combination of volumes on Randolph Avenue and the turning traffic go above thresholds that appear in charts.
And would the turning lanes be in both the north and south direction?
It would be a left turn lane in the northbound direction and a right turn lane in the southbound direction.
Deceleration lane in the south?
It would provide for, it might not provide for full deceleration.
Or acceleration?
It would be, I would call it partial or full deceleration southbound. And then the northbound left turn lane would be more for storage, getting the left turns out of the way of the through traffic.
But not past the intersecting point?
What would happen is in the southbound direction, a right turn lane would begin north of the driveway, and then when you got to the driveway, it would end. The northbound direction, where you have the left turn lane, it would begin south of the driveway, and the left turn lane itself would end at the driveway, but the through lanes need to be bumped around the left turn lane, because right now there's 4 lanes out there. This would be a 5th lane at that point. So that would need to be transitioned back to 4 lanes. So that transitioning would have to happen north of the driveway. So southbound would just be work primarily as you're approaching the driveway. Northbound would be both on the approach and the departure as you pass the driveway.
These would be 12-foot lanes?
Not necessarily. They could be as low as 10, although 11 provides for more comfort, a little bit more margin. And 12 certainly isn't ruled out.
Well, and so say 11-foot lane, have you thought about, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, please.
If they were to look at the turning lanes, is there enough width in the cross-section?
That I don't know, and that would be part of the dialogue and discussion.
Do you have any idea of what kind of footage you need horizontally to fit the kind of additional roadway capacity?
If you did 5 11-foot lanes, it would be 55 feet, plus,
You wouldn't be
plus the
doing
shoulder
5
area.
more, though.
excuse me?
Are we talking about adding 20 feet to the cross-section?
No.
How many feet?
I would think 11 or 12, if that much.
Even where the lanes would overlap? Or they
Oh,
would-
excuse me,
yeah.
at one point, you're right. I forgot about that. At one point, you're going to have the, just as you're passing through the intersection, if you're driving in the northbound direction, there'd be a moment where you have most of that 11-foot width you haven't tapered back yet, and you'd have the right turn lane heading southbound. So at that point, you would potentially have a 20-foot, 22-foot widening, but it would be not necessarily on one side of the road, but could be split.
Yeah, understood, yeah, okay, thank you.
Could I ask you, did you prepare any sketches or pro formas reflecting these proposals for the board or for the hearing?
No. Nope, I only consider it something that should be discussed with MassDOT.
Okay, then why don't you continue with your presentation?
The other aspect of site access that I wanted to mention is emergency access. My understanding from testimony from the fire chief is there are going to be several emergency calls per week. And the number of calls varies with probably the number of units involved in a project. In this particular project site, there's one access point. And the one access point is basically one lane per direction. It would be preferable to have a second means of ingress and egress for emergency vehicles, preferably removed in terms of distance from the existing or proposed, driveway, much like you'd have two doors in a room like this for fire egress. The idea is if there's some obstruction or some problem or some incident on one way in and out, then you still have the other. In the absence of a full secondary means of vehicular access for emergency vehicles, then what I've seen employed in the past is a boulevard-type treatment, where instead of having a 12-foot lane in and out of the site, the lanes are wider, perhaps 16 feet.
Two 12-foot lanes.
Instead of one 12-foot lane in and one 12-foot lane out, I've seen a boulevard treatment where you have a 16-foot in, a 16-foot out, or thereabouts, and a mountable median, and that provides more forgiveness, way of getting around incidents for emergency vehicles, if you can't have the second means of in and out. Then once you get into the site, the emergency vehicles should have freedom of movement, be able to circulate around the site. When I looked at this particular site plan, including the emergency vehicle routing plan that the applicant provided, it appears as though the emergency vehicles are going to have to back, it looked like for hundreds of feet on the site in some situations. And there's a 3-point turn involved. And in addition to that, part of the travel path includes a reverse curve, which could involve backing at the same time. If I'm wrong on that, someone could correct me, but that's what it certainly looked like to me. If the site had more freedom to it, in other words, it was less tightly built out, there'd be room to provide ways of the emergency vehicles being able to get through the site by looping. In other words, if the parking aisles were connected somehow in the back, that would be a way to prevent the backing. Bearing in mind that when emergency vehicles are on the site, they're not the only vehicles that are on the site. There's other activity on the site, traffic going in and out, and some of that traffic includes vehicles that are larger than passenger car size. Some of them are trucks, trash trucks, and service vehicles as well. Then in a more general sense, looking at the way the access point and the rest of the site ties together, the site circulation involves essentially 3 dead ends. There's one access point, and the access point splits, or the driveway splits into a fan of sorts, and each prong of the fan terminates with a very short stub. If vehicles need to be searching for a parking space, and I did address parking whenever you're ready for me to talk about it. If vehicles are searching for a parking space and they don't know exactly where they're going, rather than circulate through the site in a forward direction, they're going to have to deal with the dead-end aisles and somehow turn around to get around the site and find their space. It is preferable not to have the dead-end aisles and to connect the aisles with loops so the vehicles can circulate more freely in a forward direction, particularly if they're looking for a parking space.
Could I ask you one question on these last two comments you had about the looping of the interior roadways and the dead ends? Is it your opinion that it is impossible to plan or make looping feasible because of the size of the buildings on the site when combined with the topographical issues that one experiences on the site?
It appeared to me that the site, as it's laid out, is bordered on wetlands with retaining walls,